Want to know the real secret to parenting teens? It's not control, it's connection. In fact, I have a quick example. The other night, one of my sons wanted to go out with his friends, and I was fine with that as long as he stayed in his curfew time. And so we talked about that, and I told him, okay, this is the time you need to be walking through the door. So he agreed to it, and thought, okay, he'll be home. He said he'd be home. So, of course, as the night went on, I was like, this is getting pretty close to his curfew. He is not going to walk through that door by the time he was supposed to. And so I called him on the phone to chat with him a little bit and say, hey, where are you? And he said he's on his way home. And I said, well, you're not going to get here before curfew. You're not going to be walking through the door. And so he gave me his excuses. And after listening to his excuses, I said, okay, but you promised you would be doing that. You would be coming through the door at that time. And so I chatted with him kind of how his night was and whatnot. And so he talked to me about that and that he had had a good time, whatever. And then I said, okay, so what could have you done differently to get you home on time? And he answered me in the, oh, well, I could have left 5 minutes earlier or whatever. And I agreed. I said, okay, well then what are the consequences going to be because you didn't do what you said you were going to do? And, his silly, oh, I can't have popcorn for a week. Yeah, he knew that wasn't going to fly. And so I said, seriously, what's the consequence going to be? And so he did come up with some ideas. And so he chose what the consequence was going to be before he even got home. But it was great because then once he walked in the door, I wasn't upset. He wasn't upset. I didn't lecture him. There was no lecture. I listened to what he had to say, and I understood why he was late. But just because I understood why didn't mean that he could just be off the hook, because he had also promised me something. And we had had a discussion about that. And so I think the takeaway on this is that it's really important to listen to our kids, to have a conversation with them, to just not lecture them, because when we lecture, they really don't hear anything. They shut us out because that's not a conversation. A lecture is somebody standing over you going, blah, 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 whatever. And nobody likes that. I'm sure my childhood growing up, I was lectured. I don't remember anything that I was taught during a lecture. I don't think that's not quite the teaching moment time. Their brains are just so upset. Your brain is so upset. There's no teaching that's going on. And there really isn't a whole lot of listening either. And so we try not to lecture, obviously we set boundaries. And then when those boundaries are not kept, then there has to be consequences. But the listening part, we need to listen, but we need to actively listen. And even better than actively listening is reflectively listening. And reflectively listening, if done right, is not going to be condescending to the older kids. And it's different for toddlers, it's different for teenagers. My toddler can say something like, oh, mommy, there's a tree out the window. And I can answer back and say, oh, there's a tree out the window? Do you see the tree? What? And then you can ask questions about the tree. But I'm allowing that toddler to know that I am listening to him. I'm hearing what he's saying. But to him, that's not condescending the way I'm saying it. To a teenager, that would feel very condescending. And obviously my teenager is not going to tell me there's a tree out the window. But an example of actively listening is my oldest daughter was having a really hard time with somebody she thought was a friend. And it was very disturbing to her. And so she was going on and on and on about it. And this hadn't been the first time that she had talked to me about it. And it seemed like it could never be diffused. She was so upset about it. And so finally, one time when she was talking to me about it, I did do some reflective listening with her. I came back and said, okay, well, what I'm hearing is that this friend did something that really hurt you, and you're no longer going to be able to be friends with her. And so saying back to her what she was telling me really diffused the situation very quickly. She felt like I was listening. It made the whole situation for her relevant, that she was relevant, that her feelings were relevant. And so it really helped her through that situation. And so it's important to remember to do that and to not be condescending to our teenagers. Also, we need to ask questions. It's really important to ask questions to our teenagers, but more open-ended questions, not the yes or no questions. Because if you have any teens that are like mine that don't do a whole lot of talking, if you ask yes or no questions, all you're going to get is yes or no, or sometimes neither. Nothing at all. So it's really important to ask those open-ended questions where they actually have to talk to you and use more than one word. And then, of course, we need to be consistent. And that consistency can look like being there whenever our teens need us, whenever they need to talk. And so that does a lot of the time mean the late nights. I don't know what it is about our teenagers, but it's like it loosens their tongue and they want to tell us things. But it can also be, we're sitting on the couch and we just happen to be sitting with our teenager on the couch. It can be us putting our phone down and then making it very apparent that we are there to talk with our teen if they want to talk. And then we can start asking open-ended questions. And so it's very important to stay consistent so our teenagers know that we're there all the time, because eventually they're not going to be under my roof anymore. And I hope that consistency and building that connection and that trust with them, because I do try to listen to them as much as possible. I'm not perfect, but I really do try, that when they are gone from our home, that they'll know that they can always come back and use me as a sounding board, that I can reflectively listen to them and then not necessarily give them my opinion or try to solve anything for them, but to be that person that they trust, and can say, I love you. I know this is tough right now. And just always be there. Anyway, if this has been an encouragement to you, and you know any moms of teens that could use any encouragement, feel free to pass it on. Take care.